Welcome to Truth Behind History. The stories are real, the impact is lasting. Today, we're diving into one of the strangest and most misunderstood events of World War II, the Battle of Los Angeles. Not a battle in the traditional sense, there were no invading troops, no confirmed enemy aircraft, and yet, the sky over Southern California lit up with anti-aircraft fire in the middle of the night. But before we get to the chaos, we need to understand the mood of the country that made it all possible. So let me ask you, what happens when an entire nation is gripped by fear, armed to the teeth, and waiting for the next blow to fall? Let's rewind to December 7, 1941, the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. A surprise strike that killed over 2,000 Americans and crippled the Pacific Fleet. Overnight, the United States was thrown into war, and the American psyche was jolted awake. Suddenly, the idea of a foreign attack on American soil wasn't just a distant nightmare. It had already happened. On the West Coast, that fear turned into hypervigilance. Cities like Los Angeles became fortresses. The government ramped up coastal defenses, placing anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, and observation posts across the shoreline. Imagine it, quiet neighborhoods suddenly bristling with military presence. Fighter planes on constant alert. Radar stations watching the skies like hawks. Because the military was certain, if Japan struck once, they could strike again, and California was next in line. But it wasn't just soldiers preparing. Everyday citizens were pulled into the fray, too. The government implemented blackouts across the West Coast. Entire cities would go dark at a moment's notice. No lights in windows. No street lamps. Even headlights on cars were restricted. Air raid drills became routine, sirens howling through the streets, sending families scrambling for cover. Civil defense posters lined the walls of every public building, warning people to stay alert, report anything suspicious, and above all, be ready. And with this came something far more contagious than military orders: paranoia. You see, when fear takes root in the public imagination, it spreads faster than any enemy plane ever could. Rumors flourished. People reported strange lights in the sky, flashes on the horizon, sounds of distant engines that never appeared. And all the while, the tension built. The stage was set. The people were ready, or at least, they thought they were. What happened next would test the limits of that fear, and reveal just how fragile the line between vigilance and panic can be. It's the early morning hours of February 25, 1942. Just after 2:15 a.m. Suddenly, coastal radar in Los Angeles picks up something unusual: unidentified objects moving through the sky. Moments later, visual reports start pouring in. Strange lights, unknown aircraft. Something was out there. Now remember, this is just 2.5 months after Pearl Harbor. The fear of a second attack was very real. So when radar operators and civilians alike said they saw something overhead, military command didn't hesitate. Within minutes, the city plunged into darkness. A full blackout was declared. And then, it happened. The roar of anti-aircraft guns shattered the silence. Searchlights swept across the night sky like frantic fingers. More than 1,400 shells were fired into the air by U.S. forces. The skyline of Los Angeles, normally a symbol of Hollywood glamour, was transformed into a war zone. Explosions lit up the clouds. The thunder of artillery echoed through neighborhoods. Thousands of people watched from their windows or huddled in fear, believing the invasion had begun. But here's the thing: no bombs ever fell. No enemy planes were shot down. In fact, there was no enemy at all. When the smoke cleared and the sun came up, the only damage was from falling shell fragments. Buildings were damaged. Cars were destroyed. Several civilians were injured. And tragically, at least 5 people died, some from heart attacks triggered by the chaos, others in car accidents caused by the blackout. Eventually, the military concluded it had all been a false alarm. That's right. Despite the massive military response and overwhelming fear, not a single piece of enemy aircraft was ever recovered. The official explanation? Radar misreadings, weather balloons, overactive imaginations, tension and nerves working overtime. But many weren't satisfied with that answer. After all, how could an entire city's defenses be triggered by nothing? How could so many trained observers see something that didn't exist? This was more than just a false alarm. It was a national moment of collective panic. A night when fear, confusion, and the pressure to respond collided. But to really understand what went wrong, we need to look deeper, not just at what happened, but at how the system itself was set up to fail. So, how does a city launch over 1,400 anti-aircraft shells into the sky without confirming there's even a threat? This wasn't just a moment of mass hysteria. It was a textbook example of what happens when a centralized system is put under extreme stress. And the cracks? They showed immediately. Let's start with the first point: action without confirmation. Military commanders were operating under enormous pressure. The fear of underreacting, of missing a real attack, was greater than the fear of overreacting. After Pearl Harbor, no one wanted to be the person who ignored a warning that turned out to be real. So instead of pausing to verify reports, they acted first. Fire now. Ask questions later. The cost of waiting, they believed, could be catastrophic. But here's the kicker. This rush to act wasn't just emotional, it was structural. That brings us to incentive misalignment. In a centralized command structure, the people in charge are often rewarded for taking visible action, even if that action turns out to be wrong. Think about it. If you're the officer who orders a massive defense and it turns out there was no threat, you can still say you were ready. You were protecting the public. But if you hesitate, and there is an attack, now you're the one who let it happen. This system rewarded noise over nuance, firepower over fact-checking, and it created a kind of theater where dramatic displays of defense were valued more than strategic clarity. And then there's the third consequence: trust. Once the chaos ended and the truth, or lack of it, came out, civilian confidence was shaken. Reports contradicted each other. Eyewitnesses swore they saw something. Officials denied it. People were injured. People died. And no one could say, with certainty, what they had been shooting at. That confusion created a vacuum, a space where facts were fuzzy, and fear filled the gaps. And in that kind of environment, the line between defense and disorder disappears. It's a powerful reminder that when systems are centralized and driven by fear, bad information can spread like wildfire, and the consequences can be deadly, even when there's no enemy in sight. But what filled that vacuum of information in the years that followed? Stories, speculation, something far more cosmic. When the guns fell silent and no enemy was found, the question hung in the air like smoke: what were they shooting at? The official answer? Misidentification, weather balloons, a glitch, nothing to worry about. But for many Americans, that didn't quite cut it, and that's where things got otherworldly. You see, when people are given fear without answers, they don't just move on, they fill in the blanks. That's how myths are born. The Battle of Los Angeles didn't just fade into obscurity, it morphed into something far more mysterious. Some began to believe that what the military had seen wasn't Japanese aircraft, but something else entirely. Unidentified flying objects. That's right, UFO culture in America didn't just spring out of nowhere. It grew out of real events, real confusion, and real silence from the authorities. The chaos of that February night, followed by the vague and conflicting explanations, created the perfect breeding ground for theories. Alien visitors, government cover-ups, reverse-engineered technology. It all started here. Then came the Freedom of Information Act decades later, which gave the public access to previously classified documents. But instead of providing clarity, it reignited the flames of suspicion. Heavily redacted files, references to unknown aerial phenomena, the fact that something was in the air, but no one could agree on what it was, only deepened the mystery. And slowly, the event transformed from a wartime footnote into a cultural cornerstone. It became more than a military mistake. It became a symbol of distrust, of secrecy, and of the belief that the government knows more than it lets on. The idea that behind every official denial is a hidden truth, and that maybe, just maybe, that truth is out of this world. This wasn't just about aliens. It was about trust, or the lack of it. Once broken, that trust doesn't just vanish. It evolves. It mutates into something harder to dislodge. And before you know it, a false alarm becomes folklore. So what can we learn from all of this? From fear, to fire, to flying saucers? So what's the real story behind the Battle of Los Angeles? Well, it's not about aliens. And it's not just about war. It's about how people and systems behave under pressure. It's about the cost of panic, the fragility of trust, and the way perception can become reality, especially when the truth is unclear. Let's break it down. When centralized power meets sudden fear, the results are rarely graceful. Decisions get made faster than facts can catch up. The pressure to do something overtakes the need to understand what's actually happening. We saw that on full display the night Los Angeles fired 1,400 rounds into an empty sky. But that moment didn't stay in 1942. Its ripple effects are still with us today. Because once trust is fractured, when people see that their leaders can be just as confused as they are, it doesn't just bounce back. That crack widens. It lets in doubt, suspicion, and in some cases, entire belief systems based not on evidence, but on the lack of it. We all want to believe someone's in control, that someone knows what's going on. But what the Battle of Los Angeles teaches us is that sometimes, no one does. And in those moments, it's not just missiles that get launched, it's narratives. So here's the big takeaway. History isn't just about what happened. It's about how we respond when we don't know what's happening. And whether it's a war, a weather balloon, or a whisper from the sky, our reactions reveal more than the event itself ever could. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more surprising stories just like this one. And if you want to take the conversation even deeper, check out the podcast version of this episode. The link's in the description. Until next time, stay curious and stay skeptical.